do we have Lynn as well? Oh, there she is. Okay, great. All right, well, welcome everybody to the special workshop here Wednesday, June 17th, 2026 with the Sister City Council with the topic of annexation policy. Really thankful to have everybody participating in this here or virtually, and you know, the council is very committed to this topic of trying to do annexation policy as cleanly and user-friendly as possible. Also dedicated to, you know, housing everybody in our community that needs to live here, no matter at the price point. So trying to really focus on how to best do that. And so excited to have input from all of our housing partners here today. We can go around the room, do quick introductions, and then I'll hand it off to our Community Development Director, Scott Woodford. So I'm Jennifer Letts, I'm the Mayor of Sisters.
I'm Sarah McDougall, Council President.
I'm Kirk Schuler, I'm President of Brooks Resources Corporation.
Cheryl Pellerin, City Council.
Peter Hoover, Executive Director of Sisters Habitat.
Michael Preeden, City Council.
Clayton Crowhurst, Housing Developer, Northwest Housing Alternatives.
Kevin Eckert, Architect with Build LLC.
Scott Woodford, Community Development Director for the City of Sisters.
And Jordan Wheeler, City Manager.
And online we have Councilor Ross.
Yeah, Gary Ross, City Councilor. I'm recovering from foot surgery, so I'm not there with you today.
And Lynn.
Lynn McConnell, Executive Director for Housing Works, the Central Oregon Regional Housing Authority, working from afar this week. Thanks for accommodating me this way.
All right, thank you for taking time out for us. So just hand it off to Scott to walk us through this.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and our invited panel of experts. We're glad to have you guys here, and we're very, very excited to have this conversation. So the format of the meeting is I will just give a little bit of background on kind of our discussions to date and what our goals are out of this meeting and the annexation ordinance in general. And then provide a little background on the process so far, and then kind of a summary of what the housing discussions have been with the council. This is, I think, the 5th workshop that we've held with council. We've also had one with the Planning Commission. Because we initially didn't know that that this was going to be a development code amendment. We thought it was going to be a municipal code. So we've been quickly trying to bring the Planning Commission up to speed as well, but trying to get some direction from council on the policy that they want to see incorporated into the ordinance, and then we'll work it through the Planning Commission as well. And then we'll, just open it up. I hope this isn't, staff talking a whole lot. I hope it's a lot of questions back and forth between the council and the invited guests today. So the ultimate goal, I think, is to get some consensus, hopefully, on these basic provisions of the housing section of the annexation ordinance. The annexation ordinance obviously includes many other aspects above and beyond housing, but through our discussion so far, it seems like the housing ones have generated the most questions and discussions. So that's why another big reason why we have you in here today. So the hope is that if we can get another staff can get an understanding of kind of a framework of what the council wants to see, that we can come back later with a draft ordinance that will go through public review, but we'll have something more definitive to react to. We've already put one draft together initially early on, and it generated a lot of discussion, and so we have something to go off of, and I think I included that in the staff packet so that you have a kind of a reference point from where we started this discussion. So just a little background, as you all probably know, the reason that we're at this stage is because we have a UGB amendment application under review currently. And taking a look at our annexation ordinance that's in the code currently, it was clearly evident that it wasn't going to be adequate for the things that we were trying to achieve as a council or as a community, and that many changes have taken place in the development world and state law since the last time the ordinance was updated. So the council has been pretty clear that they want to have an ordinance in place by the time that the UGB is adopted and ready to go. And the status of that is that it's currently undergoing local review for adoption. The City Planning Commission has reviewed and recommended approval of it. The County Planning Commission held an initial hearing, and it was continued at that hearing, the deliberations till June 25th next week. And so after the County Planning Commission, it'll go on to the board and the City Council for final review for local adoption, and then to the state. So we've still got some steps to go through there. We still anticipate, and it's our target to get this done before the end of the year, because we have some state law changes that would apply to our UGB amendment that would require some doing some of our analyses over again, which would set us back, and we're trying to avoid that. So we have some time to get this annexation ordinance done right, but the clock is definitely ticking. So in terms of the housing discussion so far that we've had, just an overall kind of broad statement that I think I can say this, the council envisions the UGB amendment area as a expansion area as an opportunity to address affordable and workforce housing needs on top of, free market housing that is also needed. But building off that statement, the council has initially discussed a percentage of total housing units that they would like to see as affordable or workforce, and that's 25%. There has been some discussion about what about commercial and industrial development in annexation areas. Should they be required to provide affordable housing? The 25% is basically based on the number of residential units that you have. And we know that not all developments out there are going to be residential. And so the question has been raised about what about those other kinds of uses? Should they be required to pay a fee in lieu? Should the city consider a construction excise tax that could be used by funds generated from these developments to fund affordable housing in other areas of town or in the UGB expansion area? The council has also discussed supporting allowance for developers to deed land to a nonprofit affordable housing developer or potentially the city if for some reason they do not want to build it on their property or cannot build it on their property. There's been some discussion about under what conditions that would occur, but that was something that was supported. There was a desire to have housing in all income categories that have been identified. Our housing studies have identified a need, not just in one particular income band, but the whole kind of gamut of income ranges. And so, how do we get that? How do we get the housing that we need to the folks that need it the most? Knowing that there's funding challenges for different income bands, different sections of the area meeting income are oftentimes in different funding buckets. So how do we crack that nut? Let's see. Also discussed the idea or the concept that affordable housing and workforce housing be integrated into the larger development and not be segregated. Realizing that certain types of housing, affordable housing by nature, multifamily, very difficult to segregate units. But I think if the idea or just the larger concept is to make sure that they're not all in one section of the expansion area, that they're generally spread out. And how do we codify that concept, or how do we get to that concept without being overly specific or burdensome? There was a support for phasing of the affordable housing units. I think the desire is that the affordable housing units are not pushed to the complete end of a development. Where that occurs is subject to discussion. One concept that was thrown out was building on a ordinance from Ashland, I believe. Ashland was held out as a community that had a good example of a affordable housing ordinance that was associated with annexation. and talking about having 50% of the building permits be issued before the last unit of the first 50% of the free market units is issued, so that there's an ability for developers to generate some revenue and to before they are required to start on the affordable housing, but to not put it off too late. And then there was some support for the affordable housing units having a similar bedroom ratio as the free market units, and similar or the same exterior building materials, heating and cooling systems, and there's been some discussion about what kind of amenities should be available to the affordable housing residents. And so for a lot of you, I think that we've gone out and solicited some input from many of you already. That was something I think the council directed the staff to do, is to make sure we get input from the folks that actually do this kind of work. Not only the affordable housing developers, but developers that could be spearheading the larger master plans to get their input as well. And that's why, big reason why we've invited you guys in. But we've also incorporated into the packet, I think the council's aware of some of the comments that you've submitted already to date. So with that, I summarized the set of questions that I included in the staff report, just as a guide to our conversation today, and to make sure that we hopefully touch on all the key items. It's not a comprehensive list. I'm sure there's some other questions that will come up, but I was hoping to, as a staff member and somebody who has to create a draft ordinance, these are some of the things I wanted some feedback on before we left today. So does that format sound acceptable to everyone, to kind of just open it up and be guided by the questions?
Yeah, I had just a comment too. I know that part of what we're trying to do, and Scott helped me with the wording here, is create clear and objective wording, with knowing that there may be some off ramps, like this is what we want to do, and then if a particular project isn't able to fit it quite like that, or has another idea of how to fulfill it with a similar intent to have an off ramp, because I know we're redoing some of our code. So I think we're trying to come to a balance of how much do we put in the ordinance and how much are we allowing for in the off ramp as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I initially thought that our ordinance was going to have to be clear and objective, as it includes housing. In the state of Oregon, anything that is associated with housing has to be clear and objective, but still getting some legal review on that, whether that applies to annexations. But I think maybe the parallel analogy there is, how prescriptive do we want to be with our standards, knowing that it's tough to write the perfect ordinance to capture every possible situation, or should the council adopt some general guidelines and have a developer come forward with a plan on specifically how they would address those goals, and then the council would evaluate that and decide if that was acceptable or not. So that's a discussion we'd love to hear from you guys on that, and Gal.
And I just really want to dedicate time to our guests and our subject matter experts today. So please feel free to start talking. Yeah.
Do you anticipate that your annexation policy, to be annexed, you'll be required to submit some sort of master plan for the land that you're proposing? And is there opportunity in that process, I guess, to implement some, that's where some of the commitment will come from.
Mm-hmm.
You guys submit a master plan for some parcel, then, you should be required to follow that.
Yeah, that's certainly that's the line of thinking that we're employing right now, is that at time of annexation there would be a requirement for a master plan level submission. Still questions about how detail oriented that would be, but enough to be able to determine that that what's being proposed meets the needs. So yeah, that would be a component of.
And then I saw acre, I think it was 5 acres proposed. If it was under 5 acres, there'd be some different application of some of the policies.
That's been some discussion that's been brought up by council, is maybe we need different standards for different size projects potentially. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Okay.
Gary has his hand up. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, just a quick comment. If you could move those mics closer to you, I could barely hear the gentleman who was speaking, and he had some good things to say. I want to be sure I hear them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this better?
Much better, sir. Thank you.
I forgot what I said, or I'd read it.
So, any other questions before we get going? No questions or clarifications at all? No? Okay. So I think the biggest, maybe the biggest item for discussion is probably the percentage of affordable housing required. The city council has put that number at 25%, I believe, as a number to shoot for. And I know there's been some concern that we've heard from that in terms of what impact that has on the developer in terms of being able to feasibly pull that off. So that seems to be kind of a high overarching topic that we might want to start off with.
And for clarification, it's at least 25%.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think like Lynn, I'll look to you and Peter as well. Like we're we're very, at least for me, in the mindset of like, hey, like any affordable housing development is great, but having and being able to work in communities that actually do set a hard limit, and ideally like a true, a limit that creates tangible amounts of housing, is the goal. On a 5-acre parcel that maybe features 150 dwelling units, 25% is great. I don't know, somebody do the math on that, but as we start to look at smaller parcels, that is where like I would maybe have some concerns about. Does 25%, like, is it adequately meeting that need? Lower than 25% on smaller parcels where you're fitting in less dwelling units, like I would definitely, like, how does what is that actually tangibly adding to the affordable housing stock? But I think I'm also very interested to hear from y'all of like coming from the other end of the equation, like what is that? Is there a sweet spot that gets into that tangible place while also not limiting housing production on the whole?
One of the thoughts I had, obviously, is like it's really about the efficiency of building this type of product. In my opinion, it's hard to build 5 affordable units, right, to make them efficient and then be affordable. So I don't know what the line is, but that's the conundrum, right? Is to try to ideally, if you could build 50 units, you're more efficient in what you're constructing and making it more attractive to build, basically. So in my experience, what we've done with affordable housing in projects that we've done, we've usually done them in larger scale, multifamily, where they're deed restricted, funded through federal support or local support that require those restrictions. The only time we've been successful on smaller scale is when we have deeded, transferred lots, individual lots, home sites, single family detached, to a land trust. Because that seems to work too, right? Like either a habitat or a land trust where they can come in and build that unit on a one at a time. But even that model is changing, I think, for Habitat and other organizations too, where they'd much rather have the efficiency of multiple units. So that's the conundrum. I don't know where you draw the line though on this acre problem. So if it's 1 acre of residential, with 6 units on it, that obviously doesn't work. So.
Yeah, I think we're hitting on the scale piece, and it's rental and it's for sale product, and those are all different things. So 25% as a starting point shocked me, and I don't know if I bowled Scott over with, if you're a vertical home builder, you're pretty happy making 10% on the project. So that would kind of kill most market rate, single family, duplex, middle housing type projects coming out of the chute, unless it's huge.
Scale's
huge.
Yeah, and that's
Like-
unfortunately my bias. Northwest Crossing was 1,100 housing units, and then that was single family detached, and we were able to. We actually have in Northwest Crossing about 8% of the units are subsidized affordable housing, mostly in multifamily, but as I mentioned, some of the land trust. Not the only way, but we were able to do that by transferring that land at a very low cost to those multifamily developers because of that scale, right? So, and if you think about that 8% on 1,500 total units, 1,400 and something, there's a fair number of units in Northwest Crossing. So it's, but scale matters. If you're building a 50-unit project, that's a little bit harder to divvy it up into those categories. So I wish I had this, the answer to what that acreage is or density is. But it's probably based on a unit count. How many units are you getting on how many units of residential can you construct on the part that you're annexing? Maybe, and there's some line that makes sense.
Lynn has her hand up.
Thank you. I wasn't sure quite when to jump in. Couple thoughts. One is with Bend and Redmond as an example, and some of the special UGB expansions that have happened over the last number of years, we're seeing between 30 and close to 50% projected affordable housing out of those. Those folks had a pretty deep desire to come into the UGB differently. And so it's those pilots are much higher percentages than what happened in the traditional Bend UGB expansion, which is what we've been talking about. But to build off of what Kurt said, I do think that the timing considerations are critical. Adding affordable housing to a market rate development stack is a brand new concept for most of the folks who are going to be developing in these UGB expansion areas, most likely. So they are either trying to figure out how to do it themselves, which is extraordinarily challenging, or finding a partner with whom they may or may not have ever partnered before. And there's a lot of negotiation as well when we say, we can't pay market rate for land or something like that. What I have seen work the best in the past is to not tie the phasing of affordable housing to the market rate units. And I say that with a little bit of a pit in my stomach because I understand the policy intent there and it's a good one. But I think you can achieve the same thing and not slow down the market rate housing by creating those parcels with a deed restriction, essentially at final plat, so that they're fully served, and either transferring to an affordable developer or to the city, and allowing that to go through. So the reason I say that is that the State Housing Finance Agency just in their most recent packet put out the wait list for rental housing financing subsidy, which we need to go forward. And there's over $2.7 billion in requests right now. And that counts parcels that at least we have not ever submitted yet. So the timing of getting affordable housing, particularly rental built, could be really long, and we need all types of housing today. So that I think is a stronger way to keep market housing moving forward and still get what you want to get. And I think that phasing consideration becomes even stronger the higher that the percentage number is, if that makes sense, of affordable housing that's being required.
Decouple affordable and market rate projects. They can't be linked.
Yeah.
Funding is challenging for either, and it will gridlock a project. It will stop a project. Just that alone will stop a project.
Really like what Lynn said. I think the deed restriction is how it would happen. We luckily had agreements with our multifamily or affordable housing developer. But if I was dividing my land and I had a requirement to provide this, deed restricting is fine, because on a plat you can say, well, this is where this type of housing is going to occur, and it's deed restricted following whatever guidelines are laid into the code. That's sort of why I was asking about the master planning part, because it literally can set those parameters. Like, you're going to have this on your property. Okay, if I know that, then I can lay my property out how I want to, according to city policies and everything. But I know what tract of land or tracts of land that will be dedicated to these uses, I can easily deed restrict it and then work with a variety of providers to figure out who can deliver that product on that tract of land most efficiently again, right? And the projects we've done with affordable housing developers, they are always years after us. It's just because of the funding models, they take so long. They're just not going to sync up very well, especially if there's a lot of demand for single family or other market rate housing. That's going to move quickly and the affordable won't by its nature. Oddly enough, the demand is very high, but the process is long.
If I may, Kurt, jump in after you. Just the example that I'd love to use is House Bill 4079, which was a 2016 bill back when Newt Bueller was our representative for a pilot UGB expansion to test whether or not land supply was the barrier to affordable housing. That became Parkside Place in Bend, which just opened its first doors with Hayden Homes within the last 6 months, I want to say. And the following year became what's now a different bill, but North Point development in Redmond. North Point just went through a DLCD process to remove that phasing requirement from the bill because they could not move anything forward. So we are a partner in there. We're doing everything we can to get that built out, the affordable housing, but ultimately it became such a barrier to get that financing that they actually requested that that phasing was pulled out of DLCD rulemaking, just within the past 6 months, I want to say. So.
And I think it's like great to hear that, y'all are comfortable with that deed restriction format as, a way to say like, hey, like, this phasing requirement could actually really, really impact any units getting built at all. And I think y'all completely understand the time frames we're talking about. And obviously everybody here, like, involved in my project, understands the time frames talked about. But I think the concern would be, just a private landowner who, fancies themselves a, new real estate developer of like, oh yeah, sure, affordable housing, like, okay, I won't worry about that for a couple more years. And then they're coming in and, putting paint on their last units and like, oh yeah, I have those 2 acres that I need to put affordable housing on. I guess I should call Housing Works or give Peter a call. And that's so late in the game. And so I think in that language, I think master planning is really helpful, implementing deed restriction, but then also, some way of, maybe I won't use the word ensuring, but at least maybe ground truthing that person presenting that master plan and willing to sign that deed restriction actually has done their homework or is willing to, hey, if I can't figure out this component of the project, I am willing to turn over this land to the city or to a competent nonprofit. I just know our organization gets approached all the time by folks that are wanting to be partnered affordable housing developers, and we quickly send over the big packet of papers that we have to sign. That's, everybody's, firstborn and then some for 99 years, and that quickly disabuses them of that, inkling. So I think that's just that's the nitty-gritty details of that part of it.
One favor to ask in the conversations, not get hard written into the notes that it's deed restrictions, because if you have deed restrictions, you're going to eliminate Sisters Habitat for Humanity, you're going to eliminate rooted homes, you're going to eliminate anybody that uses a land trust or a land lease model. And you're also going to restrict funding because OHCS with the LIFT program requires that it be a land lease, land trust scenario. So just want to have that early in the conversation.
Um, We may be able to look for some examples that would work, Peter, from other communities nearby, because typically that would subordinate under LIFT funding any sort of covenant, but it essentially just guarantees affordability. So we may be able to find some examples that would work for Habitat, because definitely would not want to exclude you from this.
We'll just say that we've run into one or two barriers with the differential between deed restrictions and land lease. So just had that on record.
I think we're hyper aware now.
Especially me.
Or because of you.
Or because of me. Either way, blame me. Blame me.
If I can back up, I was just running some numbers. So for our Woodlands project, we were at 7% affordable homes, and our fee simple standalone cottage and townhome, and that was a big stretch, and it took a lot of coordination with Sisters Habitat to bring 10 of those on board. It took a lot of coordination with Rooted to just get one. Tried to do 3 more, that fell through multiple times. So 7-8% on a development of scale, so that's 35 acres, you were talking much bigger, is pretty large for any type of home that is a for sale subsidized product sitting on its own dirt. Now, as you get into things that are sharing lots or scaling units or other things, that could be different. But that again was a far reach. My recommendation was going to be sort of a 5% range. But as projects scale up, scale that 5% higher. As projects scale down, it goes to 0 pretty quick.
So I think one of our problems to solve is I'm just going to use 200 acres, developable acres,
Yep.
And somewhere in there, because these are partners we're currently working with, I think, we need Lynn, we need a Clayton, and we need several Peters, right? So we've got, different levels of rentals and different levels of, for sales. And so I certainly think when we're talking about these higher percentages, that's including some balance of very dense units. So I absolutely hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that, Kevin. But I just want to kind of paint the bigger picture too of what I believe we're looking for. I mean, I'm one person. I don't want to speak for everybody at this point, but
I think at those percentages, you have to have density. You're going to do it you're going to do a lot of that in multifamily form, rental, and then supplement that with land trust for ownership type things, to build equity for folks. And it goes back to this efficiency in delivering these projects. Those matter for affordable housing development, just like they matter for us as market rate. We have to be efficient. Not every market rate apartments and for sale product, they run the gamut on price, right? I mean, it's from the entry level, the middle, and then the upper end, and so you're always going to have that spread going on. But you still, efficiency is the key. My point being, the upper end, sometimes you don't have to be as efficient, right? Because people are paying a premium. Entry level, middle housing, it's important that you're building and you're efficient in your land use and all that. So your density is the way. Look at how large scale home builders go to the density model. They're building small lots of homes, and it's how they can afford to pay for the land cost and all the infrastructure.
It might be helpful for at least me. And this is like an amateur question, but like the math, right? Like maybe walk through what a project of 35 acres looks like and how it pencils out for you to be able to then, sell 5 acres to Peter's getting a lift, funding through the state to make you whole, right? So your project effectively becomes a 30-acre market rate project where we then get the 5 acres for affordable housing, but you're not, losing your 10% margin or whatever because Peter's making you whole with that land transaction, right?
Well, just from previous experience, we just, at Woodlands, we just took a financial hit to get the lots to Peter at a significantly reduced rate, just to deliver the affordable housing we committed to providing, if that makes sense. Peter was able to get funding for land separate from construction, which was helpful, but it wasn't adequate to pay for the lots in full. No, no.
And the parcels we've
And that's gonna
sold, we sold to Pacific Crest Affordable Housing for 2 big projects in Northwest Crossing. We basically sold at our cost. We were trying to just recoup our investment in that land. And there's a lot of allocated costs, but it's, you know, you build an off-site intersection, how much of that are you going to recoup from that? So it's a little bit of an art, but we're really kind of we've always approached it as, what is our cost in that project, in that piece of ground, and then we negotiate basically. But we start there. We're not just marking it to market. We actually start conversations at market, but we try to figure out how to make that work and find some ground between. Lynn's on the screen, and we're talking to her about a parcel right now and the price of it. So she's laughing. She's listening closely to us.
I mean, that's like kind of the crux of the issue here is land values are so high in Central Oregon, right? But we have the same access to the same resources that, you know, Peter has to apply for and Clayton has to apply for. And what is a lot for habitat these days, you know? Like,
I have the honor of paying full retail except for Woodlands. And so the last land that we purchased was about $44 a square foot that we paid. It adds up quickly.
And that's pre-improvements.
That's
pre-infrastructure,
That was better.
city fees,
was
pre
barely.
all of it. Yeah.
So it's a challenge. Insofar as funding, right now, who knows what the LIFT program will be like in the future, but right now I did $190,000 per door, basically. And if I'm spending $190,000 on a lot, it doesn't work. I have nothing left for vertical. So, you know, unless it is a benevolent developer, such as we experienced with Woodlands, you know, we received, I'm going to guess it was at 40% of market, or perhaps even less than that.
Probably about half, yeah.
It makes it very challenging for us to be able to do vertical.
I don't want to derail us, but I want to bring up one point that's not in here anywhere for us to discuss at some point. There's just no carrots. There's a bunch of sticks in this policy. And the carrot is you can bring your land in. And the other carrot is we have a little bit in the development code for affordable housing for lot size reduction and the rest. That's for me, and again, rental, scale, for sale. There's a lot of nuance in here, but where's the SDC waiver conversation or the, different, lose the lot size dimension things, since building code and fire code dictate that anyway. I mean, there seems like there's room here to offer other ways for developers to recoup basically their donation to the affordable housing cause through other mechanisms that aren't present yet.
And I think that's really important. I mean, I want to hear all of these ideas. Still trying to, keep it focused on this is just, we're trying to write annexation policy. So I think some of these things would not go in an annexation policy.
They dovetail well into our code audit that we're doing. And I think you might have provided some comments to that effect, but we do have some provisions that we added or enhanced with the efficiency measures. Some that Habitat's taken advantage of. I think the reduced lot size on the cottages going from 2,000 down to 1,400 was something that was helpful. And Peter, I think that's something you said you wanted to see continued into the future. And there's some other provisions that we haven't anybody take advantage of, but like density bonuses for doing deed restricted. But I'm certain we're open to looking at how, if that's not working, how it could be made better. We also have to be, keep in mind that we have a certain number of units that we have identified as the need. If you go too much above that, then I don't know if we run into some issues with the state by going above the unit count that we identified that we needed. But I think those are some things we can take into consideration here soon.
Regarding this question over the percent, what I wrote down after reviewing the materials was, and I don't know what and analysis went into, just, you have what I think your housing needs analysis came to the conclusion you needed just under 2,000 households, 1,973 or something like that. So was there an analytical approach to say, well, of those 2,000 units, how many do we need to be affordable?
Yeah.
Over a 20-year period, which is, we're all obviously speculating, very, very challenging, but that's a good starting point. If there's, maybe that math was done, I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah, it wasn't done with this latest housing needs analysis, but the 2019 one that we did, or actually was related to our housing plan that we put together in 2022, where it did take a look at those overall units that we needed and started to stratify how many of them are needed in each category. So we do, and we talked about extrapolating those to now. We talked about also getting those updated to make sure they're still accurate, but we do have that information for at least 5 years ago.
Yeah,
34% was 80% or below housing units.
say that again. I'm sorry.
34%, 80% or below.
Is the housing needs?
Yeah. Yeah, and then 20% middle income, 46% market rate.
Yeah, I mean, it raises why we're all here. It raises this great question of how do you deliver 30% of the housing units to be subsidized, affordable? That probably even taxes the developers of affordable housing.
And I think that's a big picture. And one thing is that we've had a number of multifamily come online since those numbers, so that number isn't so bad now. And also, we do have, I know we're really hyper-focused on the UGB expansion area, but, we do have, and we are tight on land, but we do have still some significant parcels in town that have yet to be developed, so there is this potential for some of that to be absorbed in other parts of the town. And I'm just trying to tweak the pressure relief valve a little bit here, that it's not like you guys have to deliver this many citywide, but yeah, we kind of get off a little bit because we're so hyper-focused on this expansion. And I know the state, there are some guardrails on what they want to see over in that area, but we do have some other parcels in town that could still deliver on a lot of this.
That's true, yeah.
It sounds like we really need to have some flexibility here, obviously. And when I looked at what we had as far as percentages for 30% of AMI or less, 30 to 50% of AMI or less, we had very specific percentages. But in that draft ordinance that was also in our packet, instead of going with this specific percentage, it was the bonus point program, kind of like how we do density, which gives a developer a little more room to breathe, to saying, well, if I can deliver this, then I get a little more credit towards our ultimate city goal. It just feels a little more flexible when I'm hearing all of these, concerns about how to make the numbers work for development.
I have a question for the group, and Kevin, it kind of, something you said just kind of picked my brain. We're talking percentages, and we're linking, obviously, market rate and affordable housing percentages. If that, you mentioned decoupling that. If we do that, what's the metric? How do we figure, what, yeah, what, how do we measure success if we don't use the percentages?
I think to Cheryl's point, I was going to bring up having specific AMI categories that have to be achieved will run afoul of the funding structures that are trying to be put in place to fund those projects. Those are the driver, and in fact, when you grant stack, you're going to have different AMI things occurring within different grants for one project that are going to totally conflict with anything the city tries to designate. Right? It's the nature of the beast, unless we're just extremely fortunate to grant stack in a way that works for that specific project to meet the city's prescribed goals. So we started with less prescriptive. This needs to be less prescriptive. How to measure it? It could be a point system, a unit system, something But I believe it should be part of the master plan and the applicant proposal for the assessment by City Council, Planning Commission, whoever that body is going to end up being, to figure out if it's a reasonable lift of affordable or not. Unfortunately, it's going against our newest House bill, which is telling us to be very prescriptive and remove the nuance and process from land use. But I don't see any other way, because whatever the ordinance is that gets written, the more exacting it is, the less effective it will be the moment it comes out and into the future, given we don't even know where funding is going to come from next year for these projects. So does that answer it to a degree?
Yeah, that answers it. And what it does is, again, here we are, sisters, one more time, blazing a trail. And I charge us to do that. I think we can do it. And I think we can come up with something. I don't know what that's going to be, and I think we have to come up with that together, not as just a council, but as a community and a city. And I have more questions than answers still, even though this is our 5th annexation meeting.
The reason it will work here is because of this partnership. This hasn't happened in other communities, and that's why these policies get enacted and they're complete failures. They literally cripple development potential. The city I came from some years ago spent 20 years coming to this arrangement, and it was a colossal failure. All their carrots were not something developers could take advantage of. No private developer is set up to go in and create an apartment project and have affordable units inside of it to manage. That's totally outside of their range. They need a partner to do that, a land lease partner, a Clayton, somebody. So for us to sit here and have this conversation and really tease out all of the different types of projects and housing and ratios and all of that is crucial. I think it can only happen in this environment. Yeah.
If I may, the carrot is an interesting concept, and you mentioned we don't have a lot of carrots, we have a lot of sticks, and I don't disagree with you on that. So I would like to challenge those of you that work in the industry to give us some examples of what kind of carrots we could provide as a city to try to make this more doable, more palatable, more cost effective. And I also, I know we mentioned it briefly, the gentleman down, who I asked to speak louder before, I didn't catch your name, sir, is we're going to be looking at workforce housing as well, which has perhaps, hopefully, a little bit better margin of profit than some of the others, both market rate and rental. So, when I talk affordable, and I know we have lots of issues related to the funding sources, when we talk workforce, I think that's a little bit higher AMI, and that presents different challenges because some of that funding is not there. So no real answers. I just kind of like to hear what some of the carrots might be that you've seen work in other areas to try to make this pencil out for you when you do the work. Thank you.
I've seen, and maybe Ben's not a great example, but height variations, allowing more height of a building when you're adding affordable units. Obviously, some of the financial property tax abatement or STC abatement, and those are, the property tax one is usually time limited, some period of years that you don't pay property taxes. And those are all very helpful, and they do, you saw a project in Bend that really fought for some abatement of property taxes and, caught some flack for that because they were almost done when they asked. Those are the common ones I'm familiar with. Again, I'm not a developer of affordable housing, so I don't pursue those. I more hear about them. There must be others.
Yeah, Kirk's hit them pretty well. The height one's tricky, right? We don't want to build above 3 stories in Sisters. You really want to go to at least 5 for elevators to be efficient and for getting those extra units. So could we do a 5-story affordable housing project in Sisters somewhere? I don't know, but you're paying BOLI. And you're paying, BOLI, unless you bring in a land trust or divide it up a different way. But so, the incentives are not as clear cut as they would be in a more urban area, but SDC and property tax abatement cuts 10% off a project cost, just like that, right? So, yeah. And to your point, Gary, sorry, on the workforce housing, the only grant I've ever seen for workforce housing was from the City of Sisters.
That brings up kind of one of the other discussion questions that we've had is whether we need to have any kind of intervention to get workforce housing, or given some of the changes we've made to our code to allow different housing types to be, and we could even go farther, to allow different housing types that are more affordable. Does the market just address that segment of the need by itself? I think there's potential there, but I think there's some examples also of small units with really nice finishes not being affordable at all, right? We've got an example just over here where this is that triplex adjacent to City Hall was the first one to take advantage of our allowance of triplexes in residential zones. It's great infill, but I think those 1,200 square foot units are being rented for about $2,800 a month. So I guess the question is if it's just left to the free market, because I think that's a need that the council's identified. They don't want to see just affordable, but want to see opportunities for workforce housing. What's the best way to achieve that? And can we just leave it up to the market to do that, or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of our project specifically, is we're able to get up to 80% AMI, and we have about 55% of our capital stack is grant funding. So it is a very steep drop off to go from above 80% with all of your units, because any funding, and especially grant subsidy cuts out at that point. Mm-hmm. Obviously with, the 501c3 bond tool that we're using, like that does allow you to reach into, higher income levels. But I think right now, yeah, we do not have a statewide or federal tool to help bridge that huge step. And it really doesn't pick up until, probably 110, 120 AMI again. So I think at least on the multifamily, and this would be nonprofit multifamily, because, housing authorities are in a different kind of property tax zone. But the property tax abatement is a big one for rental housing, because that allows you to leverage a lot more debt just because your operating expenses are lower and your NOI is higher. So that, as far as a local tool, like for sure that is one. And I almost wonder about, in terms of looking at how a larger master plan development gets structured, if you've got the stick out there of saying, hey, we are requiring, 25% of dwelling units on this large development to be affordable. If you're hitting that, then, the development as a whole is able to enjoy some type of property tax abatement as opposed to just that. And I think, probably like at some point, Kevin, like I'd love to hear from your end of like, looking at it from the dwelling unit perspective is like, gosh, doing 20% of our, homes as deed restricted affordable or land trust, like that's just not feasible. But from a land perspective, is it feasible to get a higher percentage? Because that's where I think, that is both for affordable housing production, like the two things that are more under local control, market control, at least land costs and then property taxes. And yeah, land is obscenely expensive here. And if an affordable project, at least, my math is 2 or 3% of land costs within your total budget. And if it's more than that, it's going to be tough to pencil. And it's, tight, just as tight of margins for y'all. So that's where on the, like, I think on the perspective of like, this annexation ordinance is talking about bringing in land as opposed to bringing in housing units. That land will be used to produce housing units. But is there a way of looking at this percentage or unit production question a little differently?
Go ahead, Lynn.
Wanted to talk a little bit of math here and what is AMI in Deschutes County right now, area median income, just because I think it might help ground what we're actually talking about. So right now for household of 4 in Deschutes County, the actual area median income is 120,000. That's your gross income that you can make for a household of 4 and be at median. To go up to 150% of AMI is roughly 185,000 in income annually. And if you do the math of roughly 30% being affordable to pay towards housing costs, that puts you close to 4,000 a month for housing. So even doing middle income housing in the way that you're suggesting would actually exceed that triplex cost that was just cited. And so I want to be cautious that 150 is a pretty big number. Politically, of course, there's sometimes implications for that. And that's exactly what we saw in Bend, as Kurt referenced, with the larger property that had the exemption. Absolutely, property tax exemptions are a huge deal in this space, and there is, in fact, a state middle income property tax exemption. I can go back and try to find the citation. I believe Tillamook County is the only one that put that into place, but it allows you to get an exemption for the percentage of units in a rental development, so not perfect and not for everybody, that meet that middle income guideline. I believe it's 120% in that statute. There also was a fund just created by Senator Pham in the last session, I want to say, originally designated for housing authorities. It wasn't actually the right tool for us, but potentially could be, that does have some money attached to it for middle income housing. So there are a couple tools out there, but I think it's really important to consider what we're talking about and sort of the numbers that we're considering subsidizing here, because it is higher in Deschutes County than a lot of folks realize. I do think that streamlining processes, creating those incentives, as folks have been talking about, is a huge way of getting there. That triplex is still probably going to be a little less money than a single family home would have been. And I also feel like with the pressures being put on communities by the state for things like density, et cetera, some of those natural incentives and tools for smaller lot sizes, more height, et cetera, kind of fit along with the push that we're all feeling from the state to densify and get more walkable. Let's see. But I would say for subsidy, direct subsidy of some sort, that is, unless you have a lot of resources, which nobody seems to, going the lowest in the income scale is probably going to be the best bang for your buck, because that's the hardest to produce and that won't likely get produced without some form of direct subsidy, whether that's local through land acquisition or, at cost or things like that, or as sort of a cash award, loan, or grant, if that makes sense.
Is there a time limit on the property tax abatements that seem to work?
I'm sorry.
No, you have more detail, Lynn.
The middle income one is a 10-year abatement, and that is percentage of units. And I will do my best to dig that one up and send it to Scott to circulate if that's appropriate. The low income property tax exemption, sometimes called qualified, is 20 years. There's also a nonprofit one that is permanent for the length of affordability. And then I believe, Peter, you have a land trust exemption as well. Is that right?
Yeah, not to get technical, land lease is what we use. And
Okay.
it is a perpetual exemption. We have to apply annually for it, which hopefully cities at some point will take into consideration and have a permanent exemption rather than having to apply annually. But yes, we're exempt.
And is that just on the land or the land and
It's only on the land. The homeowner would still pay the taxes for the dwelling improvements.
And it, at least my experience, Florence on the coast has a multi-unit property tax exemption program. I think that's up to 80% AMI, and also has some, percentage of units within a larger project is still eligible, and that's a 10-year exemption. To get anything funded, not anything, but a lot of projects funded in the 60% AMI range, you're typically using low-income housing tax credits, and that's usually a 15-year compliance period that you're married to your investor. So 15 is nice. In that one particular instance, to your point, there's like a million moving targets with funding. So, like a 10-year property tax exemption, like, heck yeah, sign us up. Yeah.
So we are looking at the MERL program, which is that moderate income revolving loan program. So we're kind of starting the process. There's a lot of steps involved with that. I think one concern that we have as a small community, especially for the targets that we're looking at, is having multiple property tax exemptions on the books. Where up to 30% of units possibly are getting exempted from taxes. That's a lot. That's a large loss of revenue into our general fund over a 10-year period. Question in terms of carrots and sticks, the question that we've kind of been kicking around in terms of providing more carrots, it is somewhat of a stick as well, is a construction excise tax that could fund affordable housing. And curious how developers feel about, you may be paying a premium, right, in terms of excise tax, but you may be getting that back in terms of SDC waivers or direct grants to build more affordable housing. And a lot of other communities have that, but.
So Jordan, I just wanted to jump in. When we talked about it, I think we were talking about on commercial and industrial only. Mm-hmm. And that was on the advice of Lynn, in a conversation with Lynn. So just wanted to make sure we're checking where we are.
I'll speak to commercial. I'm pretty scarred trying to get commercial projects to work over the last decade, and having about a 10% success rate, if I'm generous. Commercial projects are already so debt burdened compared to what you can get in leases. And you have to, we were fortunate to find an operator at Woodlands who could just bite off an excessively high cost of land, construction, and all the rest because of their business model, and they're a unicorn. So adding debt to commercial or another cost to commercial would pull the other way on commercial being developed. I think Kirk and I have generally the same approach. It's an amenity. It's a loss. You just do a good commercial entity, a good cafe, a good small grocer, a good whatever you can get into any development. And you're basically looking at your home sales or rentals to be a little bit higher because of that amenity. You get a little bit more maybe out of your housing than you could, and you're taking the loss over here on the commercial to sort of balance the numbers out.
It's like a loss leader.
It is to a degree. You're financing a startup business, a small restaurant operator, somebody to just make your location more vibrant is really what you're doing.
And I definitely confirm that. However, in Northwest Crossing, in phase one, we built a commercial building. I think we got paid in coffee for the first couple of years, the rent to the coffee shop. But honestly, it all depends on the developer's perspective in that, Northwest Crossing was 20 years. We still own those buildings. And we built them 20-something years ago. So we built them for $125 a square foot. And now we're getting rents that would be, if they were built for $350 a square foot. So time heals that, but you do have to absorb that hit. My first take when I read that idea of taxing or fee or whatever you want to call it for commercial or industrial is it struck me for a moment the contradiction of that's the jobs that are going to be that these people need to that people need to work at so they can afford where they live. So burdening that employment base seemed like a contradiction to me. And when I say that, I will also add it's probably more the responsibility of the residential development to drive the affordability aspect. And in my mind, I didn't think putting some of it, not all of it, obviously, putting something on the backs of the employment generators seemed like a little bit of a conflict in my mind, just philosophically. Again, I'll say it again, that really the burden is going to be, some of the burden is going to be on the residential, on those that grant funds and supply funding that's below market and things like that. That's where the subsidy is going to come from, in my mind. That was my first reaction. But you're also right. If building commercial in a mixed community, where even the project that we're looking at in the Northeast here, we assumed a fair amount of commercial, and we knew that it would be subsidized for several years until there were enough homes around it to make it work. So just, again, that would be a burden to have more impact on it. But I approached it more just philosophically, like, why are you taxing the people that are creating the jobs, if you will, or creating the space for the jobs? Because that gets passed through in rent. Depends on paying it, the construction part of it.
Thanks for those comments, Kirk. We spend a lot of time talking about affordable housing, and I've always said, well, what about affordable living? And when we talk about commercial bringing in, creating jobs for us, it'd be nice if some of that could be passed down into the income of those people that have those jobs. But I also see where some of these commercial properties want to bring in maybe they're lower paying jobs, I don't know, and those people can't live here because there's not affordable housing. So it's kind of like trying to get that balance between commercial putting some skin in the game versus residential. But I do agree with you. I think we don't want to deter commercial development because it does stimulate our economy and provides jobs that we need.
And so philosophically, I think the direction that this is going, which is, hey, let's try to drive a certain amount of affordable housing development in these different levels of income. That's the outcome you want, right? You want housing that's affordable to that low-paying job that's being created. You want housing for someone moving up, and then up the scale, right? So it's and until they're out of a subsidized type of housing, that's the dream situation of what we're trying to do here. And so I think having annexation rules, development code, whatever it is that can drive that outcome, that's the best vehicle. The financing, we went down the road of a lot of discussion of financing for affordable housing, right? Really, we're talking about annexation here, and most of the people that are landowners, if those landowners if they want to be a developer, more power to them. Most of them will sell to a developer of some sort, and it's that landowner / developer that is going to drive what happens on their property. So it's really through this annexation that the real goal setting happens, right? So, okay, you're bringing in 20 acres. Show me how you're delivering on our needs before I annex you. I'm not going to annex you unless you can demonstrate that you meet my city goals. And I know that's not clear and objective, which is important. So but that's how I think about it. That's why I asked about the master planning. Is to me that's the gatekeeper. Is annexation is the brass ring that you want. As if you're going to be the developer, you need to be brought into the city so you can have city services, develop at urban levels. And I've always said as a developer, just tell me the rules of the development, and then we'll figure out how to do that. Those rules can become overburdensome. The percentages are high. And in our planning that we did out here in the Northeast, we had assumed for efficiency purposes that we would reach a high level of affordability, most likely in 1 or 2 at the most, multifamily projects. Subsidized affordable housing, maybe mixed affordable housing, but that's the strategy we would have, that's the strategy that came to our mind first, is how we would hit that high percentage. Well, I've got to deliver it to somebody who builds that. I don't build that. So I go to the Lynn's and Layton's and Peters and I say, this land in your hands. You need to, commit to doing these things. And we talked about the timetable differences and recognizing that. And I get it. You can't rely on the altruistic nature of the developer. Believe me, I know developers, and I wouldn't rely on that so much either. But so you can't it's not just on your word, right? I feel lucky. I work for an organization that follows what it says. So you need the teeth somewhere. And to me, it's that gatekeeping of the annexation, where okay, your master plan's approved, and in that approval, there's commitments, there's requirements, basically, that they have to meet. Figuring out what those requirements are is what you're doing, and it's the right thing to do. It's a balance, right? It's a balance of what you ask for versus what you can get. The risk is nothing happens if you overburden things. So a big takeaway for me when I read all the documents was, let's keep flexibility there, but somehow have the ability to use the city's goals around affordable housing as the carrot to get your land into the city limits.
Gary?
Yeah, that mic off. First of all, I want to thank you, Kurt. That's exactly the way I've been thinking too, is that the time to have that discussion is the time of annexation, the master planning. If I heard you right, I think that's what you were saying, and it sets the guidelines and the rails that everybody has to work within, and that's exactly where my brain has been on this thing. I want to come back though to a comment that Jordan was making, and then the follow up from that with a comment from the council president, and that is that talking about contract the excise tax, CET. Am I thinking that if we were to look at a CET as a strategy, and that's just an out there strategy, that the preference would be we look at that applying not to commercial development, but to potentially residential and other types of development? Is that what I'm hearing? Or did I misinterpret that statement?
I was getting water, but I didn't hear a lot of traction for the excise tax, period.
I just philosophically I can't reconcile the idea of taxing commercial and industrial builders, basically, people who are building those buildings, which then someday will provide, a place for jobs. It's just, the nexus really doesn't feel like it's there to me. But that's me, and I develop commercial buildings too, and residential.
So we're not trying to be Bend or Redmond. Just want to make that clear. But I did look up, and one of them has like a 1/3 of 1% excise tax on commercial and industrial. And I'm just wondering if any of you have worked in that environment and seen that close down any projects. Just trying to get a feel for real life examples. Hey, Lynn.
So I know a little bit about that subject. That was put into place in 2020. And without a doubt, there are competing policy objectives here, on some level. But I think the grounding is if affordable housing is one of your top goals, it can't happen magically. We need cash to put together. And in the competitive funding environment that we have right now, getting all the pieces lined up so that we're ready for funding is the only way to get it done. That involves getting site control on property. One of those ways you are potentially providing through the annexation ordinance and allowing for, a donation of land. And so that would get us really close. Still needs to get served with infrastructure and, pedestrian amenities and everything else. And all those things typically, and a lot of planning before we can go vertical in any way. And all those things have a cost. So that's a piece of it. Additionally, just getting to the lowest affordability levels. And I'm thinking 30% AMI is typically seniors on one Social Security income, particularly after a spouse has passed, so that there's less income. Tourist sector workers, folks making minimum wage and supporting a family, et cetera, can't get there without additional subsidy layering in. So I think there's a lot of ways to go between residential or commercial and industrial, but I'll say that the Bend construction excise tax that was put in place for to benefit 30% AMI populations in 2020, then Costco came in. That's not the same as Sisters, right? We're not going to get a Costco here, hopefully, anytime soon. But having additional development pop up in the wake of that has allowed for support for the first permanent supportive housing development in Bend. It's a direct link that came to my organization prior to my time here to help support that effort. And so I think really that's your competing policy objectives. Everything that Kurt said is true. And it's rare that we hear folks saying that we're in a commercial crisis in the same way that we're hearing that about housing. And so just would encourage you to, I think I'm pushing back a little bit on Jordan saying absolutely development hates it all the time. That's true. And we also need it in order to be functional and effective at getting affordable housing put on the ground. And the more resources and options that we have, the quicker we're able to perform. So there you go.
I think Lynn proved the point that scale matters, right? And Costco's and things like that really move the needle. And maybe as you discuss and debate the validity or the usefulness of a fee like that, maybe it'd be an interesting exercise to project, well, how much are we going to raise? Right. And is that going to move a needle, right? Because we've all talked about the cost of doing all these things, affordable housing and developing land, buying land. Sisters, how much commercial development might occur and at what's that fee look like over time? Because you may end up concluding that you may need a high percentage to generate funds that may move the needle for any of these types of projects.
And I'll just chime in terms of, we pay CAT tax, we're paying, excise tax if that's in a community that we're building in. Those things have never stopped our projects specifically. I think on at least the wage and cost side, like bully prevailing wages are that is the big one that will, if your project gets hit with a prevailing designation, I think because of the scale of Sisters and developments that are happening, that's it typically, or it's not going to be as much of an issue, but I think especially when we're talking in this middle income range, that is very much at play whenever you're bringing in public subsidy. I did want to comment, and Lynn, I'm glad you pointed out the 30% AMI units. I think those are the couple populations you mentioned, as well as, Cleveland Commons, your permanent supportive housing development. I think, between Lynn and myself, you're looking at 100% of the PSH housing owners in east of the Cascades. So that specifically was one that stood out in my mind in the draft code as the city probably does not want to have those units onesie twosie scattered across 200 acres. I think having a single dedicated city-owned parcel that's pushed out through an RFP to a competent owner operator that is linked with a service provider, that can do all those things. I think the need is very much here for, serving chronically unhoused folks, for serving households that have, serious and persistent mental illness or developmental disability. There's, an organization, here in Sisters that, is working on trying to get housing for that population. So I think that is very much a goal that I am fully supportive of the city working and writing down somewhere in black ink of that should be part of the housing, need that has to get created. And I don't think putting that scattered across several parcels makes the most sense either.
That's something that we haven't really touched on as much is this provision of how do you not create little enclaves of affordability within a larger development? How do you do that without being way too overly prescriptive? Is it achievable? And your guys' minds? How do you accomplish that? Is it a good goal?
You know, I've read that, and it made me think, you know, I'd mentioned we have two rent-controlled, income-based multifamily projects in Northwest Crossing. One of them's right near the core, Discovery Park Lodge, and then the other one is down by Newport Drive. They get built, they get filled with people, and there's always concern at the front end by the neighbors that this is going to be something terrible or something impact them. Go down the road and nobody knows, and so it's especially if it's well managed, and that I think is the key. Is it's there. They all live in one building, but they all walk out the door and they walk down the street. They're part of that neighborhood, and so I don't know if the physical distribution of just units is the key. It's really the quality of the building that gets built and how it's managed, and how the residents are managed to some degree. You know, we had an affordable housing project in Prineville that was done by Pacific Crest, and there was some incompatibility behavior, but you know, it was addressed. The management, you know, we were able to go to them, and go, hey, could you everybody stop feeding these feral cats outside? You know, and that was the problem. And the neighbors were like, there's 50 cats running around our neighborhood, and so that wasn't good. That's not a neighborly thing in a sense. So it was little stuff like that. But now today, those issues have been managed, and that project is fine in the neighborhood. And so when I read the idea of spreading them out, I'm not convinced that that's the way to achieve integration, if you will, or having those people be part of the neighborhood or a community. And people living in there, not those people, but the idea is they walk out that door, and I don't know where they live. I don't know what their income is or how much rent they pay. They're just part of the neighborhood. So our example is that it works. Now, that said, we did do, like I said, I think 5 or 6 lots we gave to Housing Works predecessor, Central Oregon Regional Housing Authority, Cindy Cook, and they did a land trust model, and they're scattered in the neighborhood. That was early in Northwest Crossing, and now, of course, those folks are, you know, they own the home, not the land, is what we're talking about. So we haven't had a lot of turnover in those units. Let's put it that way.
If I could just speak to the intent,
Yeah.
would be if there were, you know, an annexation of 100 acres, and there were like 7 acres in a corner with all of the apartments and all of the houses, you know, just making the residents seem othered, you know, as opposed to, of course, you know, if you're going to have a rental building, it's, you know, they're all going to be the same, and it's not that people behave any differently. It's as much about making everybody feel welcome and just another neighbor. So it's the example you gave. I don't think anyone would have an issue with, you know, having a building of all, you know, 30% AMI. It would just be if you're putting everybody who doesn't have 100% AMI in one corner of a large development. I think that's the intent, if that helps.
And there's even other reasons, if I may add to that. We want stability, we want non-uniformity, and nothing that looks anything like sprawl. We have concerns about fire, and we're having discussions about not having as many straight streets and having buildings turned to be more fire resilient. And so there's lots of reasons why we have that kind of stuff in there. And it's not just about affordability at all. It's about livability more than anything, I would say.
And I think our affordable housing developers here could maybe speak to a little bit about their residents and how they interact with the neighborhoods that they're in, right? Because even if I built a market rate apartment, I put all these apartment dwellers in one corner of the project, right? And my experience is that they're not necessarily treated or looked upon differently. I don't think I've thought about it maybe from the perspective of those who live there, and I think those who provide that sort of housing may have a perspective over that.
ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I appreciate what Council President McDougall had to say, and also what I'm hearing, about Northwest Crossing. It's not so much. Um, I think if a quality building is built and it doesn't stand out from the rest of the neighborhood, it doesn't become a statement of I'm poor and you're not. Um, I think that the reason I pushed for this a little bit is I did see a development that happened in a community to be unnamed. This is within 4 or 5 miles of where I live, and where the last houses that were built were on lots that were down at the end of the development, uh, next to some industrial development that were turned over to Habitat prior to Peter being there, and it sent a message. It it did. I mean, it was. I'm glad they were there. I'm glad they were built, but it felt like that was something that was done to kind of push the unwashed, unwanted, on whatever down to the very end of it. And I think that's the thing that I don't want to see. Where they're placed or how they're placed is as important because I think for the residents, they want to feel, like you said, they want to walk down the street and feel like they belong in that neighborhood. And no one knows that they live in a subsidized apartment versus a market rate house. And that's exactly what I want to see. And I grew up in Maine. A lot of people were poor, but the neighborhoods, you didn't know who was poor and who wasn't, except maybe who heated with wood and who didn't, be honest with you. But um, uh, I'm I am adamant that whatever we do and however we do it, that we not create pockets of poverty within the development. Uh, and I don't know any other way to put it. And I'm not hearing anything from you folks that make me concerned about that. I'm more worried about somebody else who might come in and decide that this is how I want to develop it. And maybe that's something we have to do with when the master plan comes in and says, hey, nah, it's not going to be that way. You need to kind of look at this a little differently. And also, interdispersing some of the workforce uh, deed restricted or uh, land restricted, Peter's term for it, in amongst the market rate homes is not a bad idea in my mind. So that it just kind of creates a neighborhood of varying incomes and people of varying backgrounds, and it works. But I also understand the economics of scale, and some land is more desirable for a market rate home than other land. So that's just kind of what's going through my head. I just wanted you guys to know where my brain was at on that. Sorry.
No problem. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in that Kurt's examples are one was at the edge when it was first built, and it's now in the middle of the development with the next phase. Totally fine, but still very walkable. The other one is right in the middle of Northwest Crossing, and so very visible, et cetera, and is built in a different style than many of the homes, but it works. So I love that Kurt, you had the initiative to put them where you did when you did, because I think that was the right location. We have some economy of scale in how we develop. And so having things that are too scattered can be challenging, if that makes sense. Grouping homes together to some degree, even if they're single family, to me makes some sense. And I think you can get there through things like, not adjacent to industrial, putting code in that says it's not adjacent to industrial. It is sort of scattered or mixed in with the market rate residential. It's not on a slope, it's not in a wetland. You can still, I think, get to the same intent to some degree with clear and objective perspectives and having that discussion. It's normal, and I think we have to expect that market rate development is going to want to put the nicest homes in the nicest area because that's going to pay for the provision of affordable housing or land that they are going to put to the side anyway. So acknowledging that and still sort of creating the same boundaries and constraints through land use or through the master planning ordinance, I think can get you there without going too far one way or another, if that makes sense. But I think it sounds like there's a lot of synergy in what folks are saying right now, which is great.
Thank you. I agree.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think any, like, at least affordable housing organization worth their salt is going to politely pass on a parcel that is way at the edge, or one that stands out specifically in my mind is a city RFP for a piece of land that was on the other side of their waste treatment plant. So the waste treatment plant was separating that parcel from town, and they were pitching it as senior, wanting senior housing there. And that's like, so that could also be, both. I think, yes, that, I again don't know, and y'all have the hard job here. I don't know the actual code mechanism to get there, but I do think that is very much a good goal to have. And I think informally would be, as part of master planning processes, if you did have a landowner come in with a master plan that had an affordable housing developer willing to put their units way on the far edge, that would be a potential red flag as you're reviewing that master plan of because we're, we're resident focused, and we are not going to stick people, especially the folks that are least likely to have a reliable transportation, that do not have jobs where they're working from home, like all these other factors that need access to services and need to be in a community, not around a community. We're just not going to do that. I do, Peter, and I want to kind of point at you right now, because I do feel like we're, talking a lot about, big hulking multifamily affordable developments, and we're going to, knock out the city's affordability problem with 200 unit projects. But I think, Peter, this is where I would, love to hear of how much of this percentaging works in your model, scale, all these questions on your end.
Okay, well, having lots of preparation time for your question here, I appreciate that. I'm about to solve all the issues right here. Let's first talk about the interspersing of affordable housing of any type amongst the community. Philosophically, I think that's a great idea. I fully support it. I'll use Woodlands as an example of what I think is a success, because originally the hope was that we would be able to put all 10 homes that graciously the Woodlands developers made available to us, that we would be able to do that throughout the community. Those first 4 homes that we developed under that format, I think are very, very successful, because unless somebody is extremely attentive and notices that that footprint is slightly smaller than the house next door to it, they will have no clue that it is an affordable house. Even with the 6 cluster units that we put in, I think it's the same scenario. So my point on that is, I believe that some of the interspersing concerns, although I support that philosophically, some of the interspersing concerns can be done with the design and the materials that are used, because what I have encountered in my tenure at Habitat is that whether it be our development or other developments, there's a sense from the residents that I'm a lesser than, because my house is distinguishable from other homes that are there. And to the extent that that can be avoided, whether through its design, whether it's through materials, I would suggest that. There also is a stigma. There's one development that we did here in Sisters that I can point to, where, let's just say, there's not a lot of warmth between us and the community, because it has that perception of being affordable housing. And so again, sum it up this way, the interspersing is important, if to the extent that it can be done. Primarily for the resident benefit. Certainly as a single-family developer, single-family home developer, perhaps a townhome developer, we have more flexibility when it comes to that than somebody like Clayton, who's going to want to come in and put 40, 50, 60 unit apartment complex in there potentially. Single-family homes are much easier clearly easier to intersperse in a community. Something that hasn't been touched on yet is one of the proposals was a differentiation between ownership and rental, and that there were going to be stipulated ratios as to what those percentages can be. I'll echo some of the concerns that were expressed earlier. The more regimented the ordinance is, and with prescribing certain ratios, especially with smaller parcels, you're going to make those smaller parcels undevelopable. It's impossible to have a 50-50 ratio, noble as the goal is, between home ownership and rental in a 5-acre parcel. It just isn't going to work. And the separation is another issue in the original draft that was passed by me. The separation between affordable and market rate. Clayton's going to need X amount of land. To say that I can't be next door to Clayton creates some design challenges that any developer is going to have in completing their master plan. So I'll sum up by saying I would suggest that there needs to be a good amount of flexibility. Yes, the goals have to be set up, but there has to be a good amount of flexibility so that developers like Brooks, designers like Build LLC, multifamily developers like Clayton, and Lynn, I'm not leaving you out of this. Yeah, your interests can all be not inhibited by or prevented by the too prescriptive an ordinance. So I don't know if I solved your problems there that you pointed out to me, but.
And I will just say, Peter, I think on the finishes, materials, like that part, at least like that part of the code when I read it was the one part where I was like, I think besides, swimming pools, like, we're not gonna be able to afford to put in the swimming pool or carry the insurance on the thing. But other than that, I felt like that part of the code was very well written, and like that is something that yes, needs to be very much a part of as you're looking at integrating affordable housing into larger developments. It needs to carry a similar look, style, and materials as the rest of that housing. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was reading that provision in the proposed. It says, exterior building materials. The exterior of the affordable housing unit shall be constructed using the same building materials. And I felt that was a little restrictive. I mean, it should be comparable.
yeah,
Like that. Because if I'm putting a bunch of stone on this building over here, you're probably going, I'm not putting a bunch of stone on my affordable, so that it gets, when you make absolutes, maybe that's the theme here. When you make absolutes, it takes away some ability to execute on certain things. And that's just one example that could pop up, right? Because a builder might be building single-family homes, and we want to interdisperse single-family homes in that neighborhood somehow. What if they're building, with higher grade materials, more expensive roofing, or whatever it might be, and then here comes Habitat, and they go, well, I think I can do this, but I can't do all these other things. So I think it's that absolute that gets in the way of some of these things. But the idea of comparable is not that hard to think about. It's like, well, just use some lap siding and some trim, you're halfway home, on this single family. Kevin doesn't want to hear that part.
No.
Lap siding.
So it's all fine. I think the equitable piece is very challenging, as we're talking about too, to make it absolute. And I would also caution on scale and program. Habitat's base has been 50% single people. So we don't want to produce a lot of 2 and 3 bedroom homes necessarily, even though it might be in a development of 3 bedroom homes, because that would burden Habitat with homes that would cost more and want to have a higher mortgage that they're not going to be able to recoup, and all of the other issues. So it's tricky, because I totally appreciate the structure and the purpose of doing this, but it sets another rule or absolute that's got to be met among all of the other ones outside of that ordinance. So I don't know how to, again, it's a tough job to write this ordinance, but
a great example is in Northwest Crossing, one of a very popular project are the cottage. We wrote the cottage code for Northwest Crossing that the city eventually adopted. And first of all, cottages are going to be, multiple units around a green. So you're going to have a group. If you do those affordable, they're going to be there. But they're a very popular product, because this gets to the point you're making about the unit mix, the bedroom mix. Those things sold like that because they were 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom. They were 1,000 square feet on a single story, 1,200 square feet limit on a 2-story, 1 and 2 bedroom, 1-car garages. So they were, it's out of scale because it was Northwest Crossing and Bend. During some uptick times when the market was really high. but they sold quickly, and they're populated with individuals, single individuals, or a couple. They're just because not everybody needs a 3-bedroom house.
What?
You have to build.
What?
You have to build smaller houses for people so that they have a place to buy. And so anyway, I saw that provision also, and I thought it was it sort of eliminates the ability to build smaller sort of cottage affordable housing, which is a very acceptable style of housing that we've seen that had success with Northwest Crossing. In fact, we have 12 more cottage units coming on. Again, the prices are somewhat ridiculous, but they're not subsidized, right? So they're market rate, but 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot coming on in our new project down past Summit High.
So what I'm hearing, I think we're all hearing this, and we thank you for this, is obviously the design is a huge part of it, so kind of trumping location, but also the management of the property as well. It seems like those two elements, and there's a design I'm slightly more comfortable with, because we do have design guidelines just in our code already. And that's been an issue with, with some other developments in the last few years I know you especially, you've kind of brought that up of wanting to tweak that, just, but I mean, it's really great to hear. It's very, very logical and nice to hear. We're all heading towards the same goal, just that could be a better option there. And then I'd be remiss if there was a meeting about housing where Jennifer didn't mention the opportunity for condo development. So, which is multifamily, but with ownership. And I know it's a moving target in Oregon and getting a little bit better, but also that's a place where housing needs to be clustered, because it's condos are typically one or multiple buildings together. So, I wouldn't want to negate that opportunity either, if that were to arise in an economical fashion. So I want to do a time check. We have about 15-20 minutes left, and I want to make sure people are getting questions answered, and I mean, if we're feeling like we're kind of getting through these questions, I still really want to hear from our experts about anything else that you want to bring to this conversation, whether it's really pertinent for the annexation policy or just bigger picture stuff too.
While everybody considers that, I want to just dovetail onto what Kirk was sharing, our experience with cottages. Our cottage code here is excellent. It doesn't, I have no great amendments. What we do want to look at is how to take what we've learned on cottages and scaling down and getting to where we are here to do the triplexes with, that are fee simple, that have that property line down the party wall, that are really skinny, that currently are not allowed by development code. That's the next evolution. If we can, because of fire hardening, with separation of structures, with the way we have to treat exterior buildings, we need less walls. We need less space between homes. And you can design triplex and fourplex units that are super sweet for a lot cheaper. And as long as we can get a property line down the middle, it works for habitat structure, because it's a land lease with its own piece of dirt separate from the others. But that's what killed us when we've been looking at any multiple unit type of thing that isn't just a duplex, separated townhomes. Is there's no mechanism in Sisters currently to scale those appropriately. I know that's not part of this, but I just want to lean into the cottage model is already getting beyond what we can afford to do for with habitat. So we need to, again, we were doing houses that were on 5,000 square foot lots. Now we're down to 1,400 square foot lots. The next evolution is we're going to have to put them together. So just want to put a pin in that one.
We will be, again, this year, we have kind of a to-do list of going over these efficiency measures and things like that. So that's really great to know, because we'll hopefully revisit that. You don't have much going on. We can just spool this up real quick. Okay, yeah, all right, Matt. Heard that.
I'll draft write it.
Oh, that'd be great. See? You heard it, Kath.
You should, if you have suggestions.
No conflict there.
Well, but if you have suggestions like that and you have them anytime, please send them in. Because I think we're all looking for those options, and, we're probably not the ones coming up with them. So love to hear that. Thank you.
I'd like to echo Kevin's comment, actually, because I do a lot of work in Bend, and I've done some connected townhomes, and they're fantastic. And they are, obviously, if you're sharing a wall, that's less cladding on the outside, and it puts more money into the project on the inside. So,
You also save on the land, you're doing more units.
and land.
And we had to the fire side of it, there was a fire in Northwest Crossing in one of the Neil Houston townhomes that were built early, like phase 8 or 9, and big plume of smoke. And then I went and looked at it, and the firewall worked perfectly. The unit next door had no damage, no smoke damage, maybe odor damage, but, because you worry about that, like one burns, they all burn, but the firewall worked between it, and it, got that one unit pretty hard. So those issues are dealt with through code.
And I would just lift up to ask Hayden on their math for it, because I think in some instances they've come to an opposite conclusion, not to rain on the attached townhome style parade, but yeah, I think in terms of, Mayor, let's back to your kind of comment around like what are the things where we're driving towards agreement on is, I think what I've heard from, Kevin and Kirk is that having a very prescriptive percentage, has the potential to really stifle anything moving forward. On the other hand, if you're only saying we're gonna, out of these 200 acres, we're gonna make sure that X percentage gets built out as affordable housing, and we're going to have just a scoreboard up on the wall. Well, everybody's going to sit around and wait for, I don't want to be stuck with the bill here. And so I guess I don't have it, and looking to, hopefully like Lynn or somebody smarter can bail me out here. But I think somewhere in the middle of, how is that, affordable housing production goal across the entire area, or affordable housing need across an entire UGB expansion area, how is that captured as parcels come in, and how is that written into code and into the annexation process so that the last person, who comes to the table isn't stuck with the whole check. And done in a way that's both incentivizing, market rate developers and master planners and stuff to be engaged in that conversation and provide those openings for organizations like ours to come in. Because I think that is one of the biggest struggles, is just that first foot in the door to access land to then be able to move a project forward on. Before we can show up at OHCS, we have to have some kind of site control document in hand. And so I think having something that, again, is maybe threading that needle of not being entirely, this is the, exact number, but not also saying, well, we're not going to put anything here, and just, the last parcel in way at the back 40 is going to be our affordable, doesn't get you there either.
I think the advantage of a percentage is that in itself will disperse the affordable housing, right? So this parcel, will you have a commitment? This parcel has a commitment, as opposed to your scenario, which would be like, okay, we just have to hit a number. We're going to wait for the last guy to do it. Then you're going to end this. You're going to have a concentration, and so I support the idea of annexation, having an affordable housing component to annexation. It's that thread the needle. It's like, what is the number that works? Could we have done more affordable housing in Northwest Crossing? Probably. We really didn't know. I mean, we did what we thought was, viable in a sense. But in the long run, probably we could have done more. But I don't know if we'd have got to 30% or even 25. I mean, I told you we were like 8% of the housing units. But doubling that would have been 16%, right? It's just, if you think about it. So it's. But I like the outcome of, if you have residentially zoned land, then you have a certain requirement associated with that residentially zoned land to deliver somehow affordable housing. We're land developers, master plan developers. We would be talking like like I mentioned, we're talking to Lynn right now about a parcel in our project. We're not going to build those units. We need to find a partner to deliver those units. And we're not that different from just an individual landowner. If that requirement's there, they're probably not going to build the affordable housing. If they're smart, they're probably not taking that on for the first time as a hobby. They're going to find someone to help them to do it. I do think this question of scale is, and I think there was somewhere in there that talked about maybe 5 acres was the break or something like that. I think that concept is the right concept, finding a point that says, look, if you're annexing, first of all, if you're annexing, hopefully annexations are multiple parcels and things like that, so you get to the scale. But if somebody's coming in with, a small piece of land, it's going to be hard for them to deliver on, diversity of housing in that.
But yeah, limit to high density rental versus allowing, a little bit lower density ownership product.
I like allowing low density ownership, maybe having some high density.
Yeah.
I assume the area plan will distinguish between, I don't know, I looked at your zones, I've looked at them, the single family detached zone and a multifamily zone, right? And multifamily includes condos and duplex, triplex, or up to fourplex typically. That'll distinguish, and that's going to drive some of this. If all I have is single family detached on on the piece I'm annexing, then, and I have this requirement, it's going to be harder to hit 30 or 25 if I'm doing it in a single family format. The reason we came in the way when we proposed for what we could do on the northeast land is because we could hit that number. We believed we could hit that number through multifamily. We couldn't have done it. We can't hit that number if we just were doing cottages and individual single family units. It would be inefficient and challenging to make that work economically. So there's got to be that mix, and that's the area plan question is like, well, where is the multifamily go? Where does so multifamily is going to be a likely part of the solution. It just will be maybe a larger part than the single family detached portion. Unless you
Isn't that something I think that the city of Bend or some of the annexations where the developer themselves are writing their own ordinance to kind of, it's subject, of course, to city review, but that we have, because sometimes their uses are so unique, they don't fit into our ready-made zones, and so the developers propose unique zone districts just to that master plan that we review, so they can.
Steroids now, because we did this. Northwest Crossing was the second special district, they call them, and literally they let us write our own code. So if you go to the Bend code, there's your standard zones, your RS, your commercials, and your industrial zones, and then you go down a little further. Oh, special districts. There's a list of like 40 of them now. And so that's a way for districts to come in, or developer landowners to come in and create, it's still driven by what underlying zone you have, but you can organize differently.
And driven by the area plan compliance, kind of with the area plan. So it's not just out of thin air, out of the blue. It meets some vision kind of directed by the community.
Gary had a comment.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, to the two gentlemen, not taking anything away from our other partners, but both of your developers are ones that I admire and look at as examples and hold up people's examples of attractive and functional parts of a community. And I think that when I hear the discussion of common wall homes, I'm not adverse to that. One of the challenges I think in the back of my mind, and maybe I'm just not enough of an architect, developer, thinker to understand, is how do we build those roof lines on those attached homes so that they're not pine needle / ember trap in a fire situation. So that's just something that's in the back of my mind. I don't expect an answer today, but I think as we look at design standards for something like that, that's one of the things we'd have to answer. And the other statement I would make is that, when I look at the habitat homes in woodlands, aside from the fact that I know that they're there, uh, I don't know that they're habitat homes. They look like any other home in woodland. Size gives them away a little bit, but the finishes and the looks are the same. And I think that when you hear us say we want similar finishes, et cetera, in the code, that's what we're looking for. Is that you can't distinguish an affordable home from a market rate home by the type of siding it has, or the sorts of things that had to be cut back. And do I expect them all to look the same? No. But one of the concerns I have when I hear the word comparable is who decides what's comparable, and that's a problem for us as a city to address if we decide to use that language. Because I could see someone coming in and saying, "Well, this is comparable to what they're using over there," when in realistically, in the minds of many, it's not. So those are all challenges I see. Nothing you said bothers me. Those are questions I had that maybe we'll have a discussion on another day.
I had the thought that some of these, I wondered if they belong in the annexation ordinance or do they belong in your development code. So for instance, your development code may say subsidized affordable housing will have to use materials that are comparable to the surrounding existing structures, right? And that's a subjective standard. Unfortunately, we're in that world, but that feels more of like a development code than an annexation code. And even like the minimum square footage for certain, housing types feels like a development code, not annexation.
Because we won't know those details at that time. Generally, at the time of annexation, we're not getting building elevations, so we wouldn't be able to necessarily make that evaluation.
How do I meet the burden of proof that I'm going to do that? None of us know exactly what's going to be built at the time I'm annexing. I mean, we have nice colored maps that would show uses and how we're going to comply with the area plan that's been developed. We're not necessarily demonstrating how we're complying with development code, right? Because those are more detailed and lower elevation. Look at it. So anyway, I think that's another way to filter that, to think about how you can make that simple.
And one last, back to the very beginning when we mentioned 5-story buildings. One of the reasons we haven't looked above 3, there's some political reasons why, but we don't have a fire truck capable of getting a ladder above the 3rd story of a building. And the fire department has told us if we need something that long, they have to rebuild the fire hall to accommodate it. So as we talk about things, there's always somebody else that kind of comes in and says, well, but wait. So I'm not averse to looking at going up higher in certain parts of the town, especially as we get away from the downtown core. But I think we have to think about sometimes there are issues that are outside the development code and outside the planning process that may inhibit what we can and can't do from a safety perspective.
I'm super concerned about what our measuring metric's going to be in the annexation policy itself. We have to have some measurable thing, whether it's percentages or a point system or something. And I don't know what that is yet, and I'm okay with not knowing today, but that has to be an ultimate goal as far as I'm concerned, is if we're not going to identify what these percentages are within the annexation code, we have to have something to measure, though, because otherwise it's just worthless. So let's just keep that in mind as we move forward.
Sorry, you all mentioned Ashland. Was it Ashland?
Yeah.
When did they adopt theirs? What have they learned? I mean, that's where I go next, right? What did they do? What worked? What's not working?
What would they change?
Yeah, what would they change? Like who's done this already?
They had that points policy, and I think we had that in there at first, and then we talked about percentages because they're easy metrics, right? They're easy for us politicians to go, yeah, 25%, yeah, 30%, 20%, whatever the percentage is. But if those percentages are barriers, then maybe we have to relook at the point system to incentivize and have some smaller carrots, not just sticks. And I think we're okay with that. We just have to relook at it again because we looked at it, went a different direction, and it sounds like maybe we have to at least consider something else. And like I said, I don't have the answers, but we're going to be looking at alternatives, I think, now.
Sorry.
No.
This is
Well-
why we're having these meetings, right?
No, I mean, it's very helpful because I'm thinking, and I'm just throwing this out, is, and let me know how this sounds, is, what if we drastically reduce that number to 15%? However, if you go above and beyond, then there are carrots or more carrots or something like that. I mean, is that more doable or palatable, or is that going in the right direction?
Definitely, but I still think it's by type, right? We were just talking about it's hard to do standalone. That's a 5% number. Clayton's happy to promise 25% on a parcel that's well managed, right? So yeah, and creative funding. But so I think that's another measurable piece is by type, by scale of property coming in, master plan size. That should be calibrated. We're only talking about 5 acres and up. I think there's ranges within those that might incentivize property owners to come together, which helps master planning. So I think there's some things that are measurable. I just not as rigid as what we're currently looking at.
Scott, for our land needs analysis for residential, can you remind us of how much land was needed for single-family housing versus multifamily?
The majority of it is single-family because we have multifamily zone land still available, as the mayor kind of mentioned. So the significant proportion of needs out in the UGB lands are actually single-family.
Yeah, and that's another complicating factor in here is that the easiest thing to do is stack it with multifamily rental units. What we actually need, though, is single-family affordable.
What is that need based on? How did we determine that?
How would you determine that?
Yeah.
That's the one document I brought. I brought your housing
Oh, yeah.
table. So with all of the numbers, and it does show the need is more single-family detached housing significantly. It's not by a little bit. And so then I did this math. And I was saying, 30% of the 1,900 and so on, but really it's the 1,200 units in the expansion area. I think that's the right number. What is that, and how many units is that? Well, how does that distribute between single family and multifamily? So if I have my math right, I think it's 1,205 projected housing capacity, and most of that is a single family. Well, how many units are we looking for of affordable? How do those distribute between those two uses? Just to assume it's 30% on both is probably not feasible on this single family detached.
I know we're at time, but I think we need to broaden what single family is. Again, it's the era of a standalone house on a big parcel is kind of coming to an end, especially when we're talking about access and affordability to housing. I just think if it's fee simple.
Yeah, I mean,
1,400 square foot lot, fee simple is what we're doing right now. That is a single family home.
and to your point, you don't want to become Ben, but Ben uses attached single family, cottage, and single family detached. That's all fee simple ownership. So that's how they look at that. The land, the trust model is a little wrinkle in that, but it's still ownership in that. And then multifamily is condos, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and multifamily rental. So it's, big basket of different product in there. And there's the flexibility part of it that gave us the ability to build different housing types. In fact, our Discovery West project we had to provide 60 units of mixed housing. Literally, in that the city said that can be attached single family, cottages, multifamily. We even did live work units because we wanted to lose money.
On the ownership side, so far as fee simple, it's not a requirement that it necessarily be fee simple, but it needs to be a separate tax lot. And it can be leasehold with fee simple on the vertical, on the dwelling, but I just wanted to clarify.
You're exactly right. It's a separate legal lot.
Yes.
That contains a housing unit. That's the definition, and then everything else is multiple housing units on one legal lot.
Yeah.
That's where your duplex, triplex, fourplex, multiplex.
clarification question, and then we can wrap up. But the topic of land conveyance, right, to another entity like, Housing Works or Habitat, can that land annexation be outside of the annexed area, the UGB? If
The deed of land, the deed of
Yeah.
land.
Yeah, if they're like, hey, we want to develop these 100 acres, but we have one mechanism or another, we can get you 3 acres over, a mile away, and which could be in a more advantageous neighborhood or something. Is that just a possibility on the table, or are we really confined by?
I think that's just a policy decision by the council, how they want to do it, because I think you're still getting the housing in the community, right? So that's the important part.
I just wasn't
If
sure
it can
if
be
the
done more
state-
efficiently somewhere else,
Yeah.
then
I just wasn't sure if the state was, really confining us with
don't think
annexation
so.
and thou shalt just
Well-
work in this box. I just want to make sure.
well, I mean, there is that question, I guess, that inclusionary zoning is only legal through an annexation, but I guess this is being facilitated through annexation, even though if it could involve properties already within the city. I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay.
But something to,
Again, it just makes the sandbox bigger, which that always helps.
Sounds like flexibility, which
Yeah.
sounds kind of nice.
yeah, I just wanted to kind of, if we're kind of at a moment where we're kind of concluding this discussion, just kind of looking for some direction kind of forward, I guess, from council based on what you guys have heard today. It seems like flexibility is the key word of the day. But yet, to your point, if you just say, bring us a plan, you might not like the plan that gets brought forward. So it seems like there's got to be some general guardrails or some value kind of statements of what the council wants. And we could either make that really prescriptive in the ordinance and then say also like it's written now where it says, if this doesn't work for you, come up with an alternative plan. Or we could just say, I think this is somebody else that mentioned this as a potential, that the council maybe adopts a resolution of some of their goals in general. And the ordinance says, you have to bring us a plan that gets us to this. That it might be not in the, it might not be 25% of it. It might, of total units, it might be 15%, some land, and, a combination of different things that we could have never written into an ordinance. But I think the point is, let's leave it up to, let's leave some flexibility in there, because I think we'll drive ourselves nuts trying to write the perfect ordinance. So we could either try to do that and say, here's an alternative plan option too. So bring, what the kind of the guardrails or the goals are, give us a different plan that meets generally these goals. Or we can just leave it kind of more general, saying, provide housing in accordance with resolution such and such that was adopted by the council that kind of professed what your goals are at any given time. I think both achieve kind of the same thing, and give the flexibility. Is that something that we want to go forward with?
Well, we have the backbone of like the housing plan and housing needs analysis too. To kind of point to something that has been developed that identifies the needs that the community has, and asking upon annexation that, you're addressing those needs through a blend of different housing types or whatever.
That way, if somebody brings us something that's doesn't address any of it, we can go, well, you didn't even read the founding documents.
Half-acre sized lots, gigantic homes or something like that. It's like, yeah, that's not what our.
Yeah.
But he solved it all. He made it.
Oh, there you go.
Got a matrix.
Nice.
To,
You get that community
to,
planning.
We'll give you credit.
to Kirk's point, there's clear and objective is a big push right now within development code, right? That's something we're working on, and that makes sense. That doesn't necessarily have to be the ordinance, right? Those can be different.
For the annexation.
Yeah, those can be different things. So,
I mean, ideally, to me, it's like if the council and this community can write down what they're looking for out of all the development to occur in the annexed area, and somehow create those goals, and then be able to then expect those goals, be able to expect those developers, landowners to address how they're meeting your goals, right? That's the perfect world. It's hard to do because of people who want to appeal things and expect them to be objective and defined, but that's the perfect situation. And we do a lot of architectural review in our communities. And we joke about how, because we write 40 pages of architectural guidelines, but we joke it should be one page. bring me the design, we'll tell you if we like it. You know, it's not really fair. We don't get to do that, but that's what we'd like to do. And that's sort of what is the ideal world. So how do you move as close as you can to that without, breaking rules or, creating problems?
Yeah, we have gatekeepers in our planning commission and then the council, right? And that's, again, putting trust in our community and our electeds and our committee members. And that's, the unfortunate thing is that most of the time that works, but that's what most of our laws are for that slim percentage of times and people that are going to take advantage of that. And I think that there is clearly, I hope you're sensing, there's a lot of trust and belief in partnerships and working with everybody in housing. But there's always that what if that we always have to account for. And we're also looking out 20 years, right? Like what are the needs in 5 years or 15 years? I want to make sure we're not hobbling the people of the future as well. So this is totally easy. Got it.
Right.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
With that,
I just want to thank all you guys, and Lynn, you on the call, for taking the time out of your day to give us this information to us. It's been very valuable. I think I've learned a lot. I'm learning a lot every time I talk to you guys. So hopefully you'll
your efforts to bring different voices to the table, and just perspective. And I mean, we all come to this table with the effort to try to help. We all have our biases, but we also want to be objective and try to be helpful to your goals and what.
Well, we told them to do it, so.
No, all of you, right? No, all of you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
appreciate it, and then just ask you to stay engaged as this thing continues to evolve. So.
yeah, if anything bubbles up in the middle of the night, call Scott.
Unless it's code, call Matt.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd like to add that I appreciate all the comments today,
Yeah, thank you, Lynn.
and
Thank you, Gary.
and for putting up with me on pain meds. So thanks a lot for that too.